Welcome back to another hemp episode of Hemp Aware Radio. This is your hemp-entrepreneurial host, Tyler Hemp, here today to introduce you to a colleague of mine, somebody that I've known for a few years now. His name is Jeff Cole. He's the founder and president of U.S. Hemp Brokerage. And since 2015, Jeff has been a pivotal figure in the hemp industry, building a top-tier brokerage firm to help scale hemp operations nationwide. And we're going to get into some of the cool nuggets that he's been able to glean from the industry and share with the industry and do to help his customers grow. He's got over 20 years of experience in marketing and brand building, and he's launched numerous hemp brands and products into national and international markets. And I just want to say really quickly before we jump into the show today, to remember to visit hempaware.com to grab your free hemp marketing and website audit. We go through, share some of the hidden gaps that you might have in your marketing and help you get more traffic to your website and ultimately convert that traffic into sales so that we can all experience a healthier, happier, more productive, prosperous life together with hemp. So without further ado, I'd love to bring on Jeff Cole from U.S. Hemp Brokerage. Thank you so much for being here, brother. What's hemping?
Hi. Thank you so much, Tyler. It's really great to be here today. I really admire you, and you know how much I respect you and all the work that you do. It's been great working with you, and I actually don't have another vendor or colleague or associate that I've worked with who has added more value. So I really greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here to help educate, and it's great to see you and work with you.
Well, I appreciate that. The feeling is mutual. It's been such a warm experience. You have such awesome knowledge, and your ability to connect and inspire and convert people into this hemp world and deliver phenomenal products has been really fun to work with as well. So hopefully we can empower some of our listeners and share a little bit about your hemp journey. And if we can maybe start with like, what is your background? What experience do you have, and what led you up to becoming a hemp entrepreneur and entering this world?
So I went to school on a journalism scholarship, and I got into media, and I gravitated toward alternative news weeklies like the Village Voice and the New York Press and the LA Weekly and the Chicago Reader and Miami New Times and companies like that. And those kinds of media products are really all about telling the story behind the story, getting to the truth. They're rooted in investigative journalism. And as I got into my media career, I graduated from University of South Florida. I went straight from there up to Manhattan and straight out of college. And I started realizing that there were more problems than I, could imagine there were. And I don't know why, but, started looking for solutions and wanted to be part of solutions rather than part of problems. So as I started getting into a little deeper into my media career and really embracing the concepts of trying to get to the truth and to honesty and integrity, all the different things that were going on in the world at that time, one blaring thing was that we were trashing the environment. So I got involved in environmental activism. I joined a group called BALLE, which is BALLE, and that stands for the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. So I was able to learn that, while we have global sustainability problems, those solutions are really handled locally. So I started getting, that really jived with me because all of these alternative news weeklies that I was, representing and working with, they're all local newspapers, city-wide newspapers. So as I got deeper and deeper into environmental activism and plowing into it, leaning into it, I started realizing that there were a whole lot of different ways that I could get information about sustainability. I gravitated toward large media companies like National Geographic and Smithsonian, Audubon, Sierra, World Wildlife Federation. Then also my favorite, which was Mother Jones Magazine, is my favorite. And I started working with Mother Jones Magazine. And As I started working with Mother Jones, I started learning all about green building and energy efficiency and things like that. And, sort of the large corporations that tend to dominate every industry, those companies, being companies like Shell or Mobil Oil or Exxon, or on the agricultural side, companies like Archer Daniels Midland and Monsanto. And, companies like that I started looking at and I'm like, man, these companies are just churning and burning. Like they don't really care about the environment. Then I started learning about the triple bottom line. And I learned that, wow, you can do business in such a way where you could have an impact on the economy, meaning you could make money on it, your own personal economy, but you can also do business in a way that provides a social benefit. And then you can also have an added benefit of environmental benefit. So if you look at any kind of enterprise, any kind of business enterprise, you can elect to only make it about money, or you could elect to make it about, maybe you're going to measure 3 bottom lines instead of just that one financial bottom line. So as I realized all of that stuff, I wanted to make a move and I wanted to get into green building. I wanted to get out of media. And this is fully after, over 20 years on Madison Avenue. I started thinking about green building. I'm like, I'd like to build up a real estate portfolio, but I don't want to just do any kind of real estate. I want to do green real estate. So building buildings that have, a tight building envelope, for instance, that conform more to green building standards, like you'll find at like the U.S. Green Building Council or any state level green building program that exists. And back in the day, every state had its own green building program, but there weren't very many green builders in any given market. Since I'm a national marketer, I tied in with the U.S. Green Building Council, and I started learning all about green building and zoning and all of that. And then I, took the opportunity when the time was right, and I got out of the media business. In fact, my last job in media was managing the Boulder Weekly newspaper advertising. Just before that, I was the publisher of the New York Press in New York City. And just before that, I was within the executive team, the advertising side of things for Village Voice Media. And that's the New York Village Voice and the LA Weekly and a whole bunch of others. So I made my move out of media and I moved down to Atlanta and I got my green builder training at South Face Energy Institute. And I thought I was going to go build some buildings, go, make some, buy, a home or two and renovate it. I kind of thought in terms of I wanted to greenovate the properties if there was rehab work that needed to be done. And then while I was in that green building training, Tyler, I learned that there were no lending programs around green buildings. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to the builders who are all getting trained. And these are, most of the people in the room were qualified builders who'd been building for years. I'm somebody who had built brands, but I had never built a home or anything like that. So I started running numbers. And I'm like, wow, energy efficiency is based on a 100-point scale. And capital markets are also based on a 100-point scale. So what that means is that within the way that capital markets work, everything is based on, percentage points. And you break down percentage points into what are called basis points. A basis point is 1/100th of 1%. And I'll tell you how all this works. It's really super cool. It was so much fun building that company. So energy efficiency, if your building is 20% energy efficient, as measured by one of the rating tools, you can rate the building's energy efficiency, then you should be able to qualify for 1 basis point as a credit if you're financing those improvements. And sure enough, it worked. So there's something called a net zero energy home. A net zero energy home, or even a net zero energy building, doesn't have to be a home, it can be commercial. What that means is that the building itself is producing all of the energy that it needs. So you could use solar, you could use geothermal, you could use micro wind, you could use all kinds of different ways of generating your own electricity. And so a building that's generating all of its electricity would be 100% efficient, which would qualify if those improvements are being financed and the lender agrees. Then that building, whoever the borrower is, that borrower would be able to receive 100 basis points as a credit at closing. So here's how those numbers work. Let's say you're doing $1 million property, and so many of our properties that we ended up financing were $1 million and plus. If you have $1 million property and you get 100 basis points, then you get a 1% credit at closing. And in this case, that would be 10%. I'm sorry, $10,000. So if you take that $10,000, you could take it as a straight credit, or you could use it to buy down your interest rate. So the energy efficiency would turn into a credit that could be used to buy down your interest rate and save you huge money, from a long-term interest savings perspective. And that's what we started doing. And in the end, we financed through all of our lenders, and we had most of the large banks and many, many small and community-type banks and credit unions. They signed up with us. We started sending them qualified green loan applicants. They financed the programs, or financed the building and did the loan. We then certified that the buildings were energy efficient and that the borrower was indeed receiving the credit. So then the loan closes, the credit is issued, and we then took those mortgages and were able to bundle them into mortgage-backed securities. And that is basically kind of how we did that. In the process of all of that, I learned all about natural building materials. And hemp was obviously the number one natural building material. I learned all about hempcrete. I learned about the options for doing, the things like, I think at the time there was a company called Sunstrand. They were doing like plywood made out of hemp. They did ultimately go out of business. I don't think they ran their business properly. That's probably mostly what happened. But at the end of the day, I started looking at all the different things that you can do with hemp. And then I just decided I was going to go ahead and jump right in, because I didn't see anybody in the industry who was doing a quality professional brokerage service, the kind that is needed. And I decided to go ahead and join a company called Pure Hemp Technology. Joined Pure Hemp Technology and worked with them. They've got some really fancy technology that, no need to get into all of that right now, but I became a partner in that company and worked with them. We started looking at, the reality that if you can do, call it 25,000 things with hemp, there's no real number. People estimate what you can do with hemp, how many things you can do with it. The common number that's used is 25,000. So let's just say that you could do 25,000 things with hemp. It begs the question, well, what do you do first? And then what do you do next? And then what do you do next? And how can you rank them to determine which of the things that we can do which make the most sense, because we're more likely to be successful if we do this thing versus some other thing. And I developed something called the Hemp Replacement Index. The Hemp Replacement Index is a method where I can create an index or an indices of any item that we can make with hemp, and we can compare it to all of the other things that we can make with hemp and determine which one we're going to be the most successful if we do it now. We all have limited time. We all have limited resources. So if you're going to spend your time and money and other resources on anything, you want to know that you're going to be successful. So of course, naturally, you want to do the thing that's going to be the best and give yourself the best opportunity to succeed. It turns out, and I didn't realize this at all, it turns out that cannabinoids truly are the number one item that you can make from hemp where you can replace something else, in this case, prescription drugs, and be more successful with it because it's going to have a bunch of different factors. Like it's going to be more efficacious. It's going to be more helpful to the body, or it's not going to have the negative side effects. And the reality is that because every mammal and some microorganisms actually have an endocannabinoid system, that the addressable market, which is one of the key factors on how successful you could be, the addressable market was literally everybody and their pets. And it was crazy. And I'm like, wow. So obviously we need to look at cannabinoids. So we and my partners there at Pure Hemp, we launched a brand called Pure Kind Botanicals. And Pure Kind Botanicals became an early leader in the market. And in fact, we did, through Pure Kind, we did the first ever category set to be brought into any national grocery store chain. So we were awarded the private label business for Lucky's Market, based here in Boulder. And we went to town, so we just started developing products. We started doing private label. We had all kinds of inquiries from other companies who wanted us to do things like formulate new products for them and manufacture them. So, that's really like the long version of how I got into hemp, what attracted me to it and why. And since then, again, I did enter this industry a little bit before it was even legal from a growing perspective. And that's because I was looking at things like hemp clothing, and I could buy the fabric from overseas and stuff like that. But as we got deeper and deeper into it, I just had to do the U.S. hemp brokerage. It was just, there were too many options, too many opportunities to make product, to do brand work, to reach into the national and global markets with better products that existed, with a focus on replacing unsustainable products and materials with hemp. And we have been wildly successful in some years. In some years, it's been excruciatingly difficult. So that's the long and short of it, Tyler.
Wow. Well, we're definitely going to dive into that last comment there about the ups and downs of this industry, because every single business that comes into this industry experiences those challenges, which I want to get into here shortly. But I want to comment on your beginning stages, the fact that you were a journalist and had really good experiences in all these different magazines like Mother Jones. What a cool background to be able to spread the good word and share the good report on all of the positive things that we can do for our planet. And then you eventually discovered the green building world and got experience there, helping with the lending for green builders. So it sounds like you got so much experience, and just the way that you speak, I feel like you're way smarter than I am. So I'm excited to
I doubt that.
Extract some knowledge and information for our audience.
Sounds good. I want to mention one thing on that. On the My Energy Loan Program, we started that. I started it myself, and then I, added in partners. Some were investors and some were active partners working with me to build the company. As the mortgage market crisis hit, we were about 3.5 years into it, and we had just done a very large joint venture, a national joint venture with a company called Prospect Mortgage. And then the mortgage market crisis hit, and one of the first rules that came out, through all the changes that were being made, were that you could no longer have a national joint venture with a lender. So that killed our joint venture. And then shortly thereafter, I got a call from a non-governmental organization, an NGO out of Washington, D.C. And this company said, the Energy Star program is very interested in your company. And we worked out a deal. And the way that I got through the mortgage market crisis was that I ended up licensing the My Energy Loan Program essentially to the government, and it became the Energy Star Mortgage. And the Energy Star Mortgage still exists today, and it's a really great tool, it's a qualifying tool for green building. But I just thought I'd put a little finer point on that, because that's how that company rolled and sort of how I exited that company.
That's so cool. So you had a major influence in the ongoing Energy Star Mortgage that's still in play today.
Correct.
Well, we could literally sit here and talk for hours about a lot of different topics. And you mentioned a couple of things, but I want to take a step back to a place in your life that you feel like maybe you saw a sort of seed planted. Like, do you feel that there was maybe a memory or a childhood experience that feels like a sneak peek of what you ended up getting into later on in life?
Yeah, I do, definitely. That's a really great question. I've never been asked that one, Tyler. Well, so what happened in my childhood was that I was born on the Air Force Academy. My father, obviously, he was in the Air Force. And, so we were at the Air Force Academy out here in Colorado, in Colorado Springs. And then my dad got stationed at Fort Bragg, Pope Air Force Base. And then, he got stationed in Tampa at Central Command. My dad did a lot of agency work, which is the National Security Agency. So the NSA, was something that my dad was part of. It unfortunately turned out that when I was 15, my father got killed in the Middle East on a classified assignment. And it was through the experience of that, it was through that experience that I realized, wow, things are very different than what we're told. And in fact, I've learned over all these years that usually what we're told by the government, the opposite is true. And that's what I realized. I'm like, wow, so if I'm looking at things like every day is opposite day, then I can be, then what I'm doing is I'm being more discerning about the information that's being, delivered to me. So I started looking under the hood more. And as I started looking under the hood more, I started realizing, wow, if you look under the hood and you get to the truth, then you can really make a difference because the truth is reliable. So for me, I learned that there is a certainty when you're dealing with the truth versus a certainty when you're dealing with smoke and mirrors. And you have to have what I call a well-developed bullshit meter. So that was the genesis of it, for real. I started questioning. I started, like, we were told things about my dad's death that definitely were not true. And we knew that they weren't true because he was our dad, so we knew things that just were not true. And then started digging in deeper, And by the way, I did eventually find out what happened to my dad, and it's not really appropriate to go into it on this platform, but it's a fascinating story. And, who knows, maybe someday I'll write a book about it.
Wow. Well, that definitely makes a lot of sense, going into investigative journalism and standing up for our right to freedom of press and sharing the truth. Like that, it totally makes sense that you would be led into that career and path. And then one thing led to another, and you eventually made it to the world of hemp. But on that journey, were there any major influences in your life, whether it was related to your philosophy and how to live, or just principles that you live by, or people that you looked up to?
Yes, absolutely. Early in my, media career, I met a guy. He was one of the owners of a newspaper in Tampa. His name is Terry Garrett. Terry Garrett was the most influential person in my entire life when it comes to overall sustainability. And, he introduced me to a group called the Noetic Institute, people who think a lot harder and deeper and really, try to think about solutions. He introduced me to sustainability, and he introduced me to, concepts of, like, we sold a lot of advertising, right? And I've sold huge amounts of advertising for all of those different media outlets that I mentioned, and a whole lot more. And the way that it was introduced to me was pivotal. The way that Terry introduced sales to me, and advertising, and journalism in particular. And it was that, you need to be authentic. So it was all about, using authentic sales skills, which are not manipulative. They're authentic. And you're really just looking at, here's the market you need to reach. Here's why you need to reach them. Here's how you can do it if you try radio. Here's how you can do it if you try print. Here's how you can do it if you try TV. And here's what the estimated results would be. So he really helped me create a foundation. He helped me build a foundation of just wanting to start with integrity and authenticity. And, I'd like to say I'm perfect on all those fronts, but I most certainly am not. But as a baseline for me and as a foundation, that's where it comes from.
That's so cool. Yep. Terry Garrett. Well, I want to give a special thank you for him inspiring you and educating you. And I think sales is possibly the most valuable skill that anybody could have, because it doesn't matter what career you're in, what profession you're in. Sales is something that can be applied to any relationship in life, because it's all about communication, having good listening skills, being able to repeat what people say, and like you said, being authentic. So I think that's a really great thing that he pushed you toward and helped you with.
Yeah, it was definitely the most pivotal relationship that I had, especially in the early days. When I got to Manhattan, I was working with a company called the New York Press. It was my first job and my last job in Manhattan. So I worked there for a couple or 3 years. And then I found myself, I was networking really hard and everything. And I got invited to interview with a company called SRDS, which is really the backbone. At that time, it was the backbone of national media planning and buying. So if you were a media planner or a buyer or an account manager or director at an ad agency, then you used the SRDS platforms. As I worked with that company, I had the great fortune of working with a woman named Wenda Harris Millard. Wenda was the president of SRDS. She formerly had been the publisher of Adweek, Media Week, and Brand Week, core advertising media journals, trade journals for the advertising industry. And eventually she sold SRDS. She became the EVP of revenue for Yahoo. And then she created a company called DoubleClick. So Wenda was the founder of DoubleClick. And DoubleClick is really the company that came up with the cookie, the way that you track people online and reach out to them. How you can send so basically the DoubleClick platform was the ad server network, and the cookie was the tool to serve the ads and to target, and deliver those ads to the right people at the right time. So that good fortune was amazing, right? What I realized in working with her and the whole team there at SRDS was that I didn't want to be like them. I loved them. They were dear friends and really good people. But I had been working with nonprofit magazines in Washington, D.C., because that was part of my territory. And I learned, all that I could about national advertising and magazine publishing and all of that. I already had a really good background in it. And I decided I wanted to start my own company. So I left SRDS and I started a company called Media Roots. And I did that when I was 26. And at 27, I was able, through all the networking and everything I was doing, I was able to get my own office on Madison Avenue. And I ran that company for a few years, and then I sold it. And it was really because of Terry Garrett that he gave me that great foundation. Because I had that foundation, I was able to see what I didn't want. And by knowing what you don't want is part of what you need to do to be, successful. But by knowing what you don't want, it illuminates what you do want, and it highlights what you do want. And that was really that trajectory for me. It was, wow, okay, I know what I don't want. That's not enough. I have to know what I want. And it definitely became very clear to me what I wanted. And I was able to move away from SRDS, start my own company, and then build that up and then sell it.
Very cool. So we've learned about your background, where you come from, some of the principles, the people that have influenced you, the principles that you live by, authenticity and being genuine, knowing how to do sales and advertising. Is there one lesson in owning the U.S. hemp brokerage to kind of bring it up to today that has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point in life? Like, is there one big thing that you've learned about this business that other hemp entrepreneurs particularly should learn, or maybe you can help them prevent going through the struggles that you had to learn?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. There's one glaring thing. Okay. Do you mind if I tell the story about how I'm getting to this point?
For sure.
Okay. So I had entered the hemp industry. I went to work with Pure Hemp Technology out in Fort Lupton. I was there for a little while, and then I left and I went to Restorative Botanicals and worked with Restorative Botanicals for exactly 1 year. Loved Bernie from Restorative, and I loved Ed Lehrberger from Pure Hemp. Interestingly, those two companies have now merged, right? That's not by accident. I didn't play a part in that merger other than I kept telling each of those people, Ed Lehrberger and Bernie, how I thought that they should be together. I thought those two companies were just perfect together. Really, really great organic standards, really solid people, totally tied in with integrity and all of that. And so I worked with them and it was phenomenal. But then remember, I wanted to do the U.S. hemp brokerage. So part of the U.S. hemp brokerage is that I wanted to grow hemp. So I had already grown with Pure Hemp Technology. We'd already grown some hemp. We did a couple of different farms. I kept going after I left them. And what I learned was, 1 year I had four or five hemp farms that I was interested in running or investing in or supporting or putting together the team to do the farming. And then so that 1 year when I had that multitude of different farm operations, I noticed that a couple of those teams, that the leaders of a couple of those farm teams were definitely plotting to essentially skim off the top and basically rip me off. So I called it quits on those two farms. And the night, so I did that all in one day. And then I went home and I sat back and I took a nice warm bath and I fell asleep. And then I woke up. And when I woke up, I realized I had had a dream. And this dream, and it all kind of rushed right back to me. And I know it sounds hokey, but this is exactly what happened. I wake up and I realize that I had this dream. And the dream was, and I'll use a vernacular, right? It was, dude, you have to start by honoring the plant. And when what you're doing is just focusing on converting the natural resource to cash, that you're leaving most of the value on the table. And that's not the way to do hemp. The way to do hemp is to honor the plant first. Don't look at the plant as a paycheck. Don't look at the plant as a way to get rich quick. Don't do that, because what happens is this plant is so strong and powerful that everything is attracted to it. If you're a ladybug, you're attracted to hemp. If you're a deer, you're attracted to hemp. If you're a rabbit, you're attracted to hemp. If you're a human, you're attracted to hemp. So rather than looking at the plant as a way to convert it to money, I began, based on that dream, I began honoring the plant first. And by honoring the plant first, 9 years later, I'm still standing. When pretty much every other company that I know of that was even in my competitive space no longer exists. They just weren't honoring the plant. It was all about money. So that's the rule, and that's what I've learned. The number one thing is honor the hemp plant and don't see it as a way to convert the natural resource to cash, because you will leave most of the value on the table if you do so.
So to dive deeper into that concept of honoring the plant, would you say this is more of an internal shift, or is it something that you physically started doing different in your actual life, like how you grew the plant or how you talked about it? Like what did that look like, or what's an example?
Sure. Yeah, so that I started to respect it. I started to really respect it. One morning I was working, with a group on a farm right in the foothills of Colorado in Boulder. It's an organic farm. And they were growing, we were growing a really amazing strain. It was a true cherry hemp strain. And I decided one morning that I was going to be like, well, I wonder what happens when the sun hits the plants. Like at the moment that the sun hits the plants, what happens? So I I picked a morning and I went right to the middle of that field just before sunrise. And I'm sitting in the middle of the field. You can imagine it. I'm sitting Indian style, looking at the mountains, at the beautiful Boulder Front Range, at the Flatirons. And I'm watching the plants. So you can imagine the sun starts to hit the tips of the peaks first, and then it works its way down as the sun goes up. And I'm watching to see what happens to the plants when the sun hits it. And I'm telling you, Tyler, when the sun touched the plants, they sprung open. They were practically singing, and it was amazing to me. So it was kind of in that moment that I started looking at the hemp plant, and really at all plants. I started looking at them as more than just plants. I started looking at them as actual sentient living things rather than as something that we could just kind of take for granted. And but not money. It's like this, what these plants do and what they deliver is so much greater. So because of that dream and then that experience, I decided to totally redo my company. So whereas I was initially set up just to sell hemp product, I started to look at it way differently. And I organized the company, and instead of just to make money and to make a positive difference socially and environmentally, I wanted to do something a lot different. And so I created the 4 different divisions within the U.S. hemp brokerage based on that experience. So it was a very real personal experience. And I applied that and that respect, that real respect for the plant and all other plants and living things. I used that information to reorganize my company and to really start focusing on solutions within a timeline. So cannabinoids were clearly here to stay, but it was going to be years away before we could get hempcrete to be like a certified building material. But I wanted to position myself in a way where I could see the use of the plant across all kinds of different industrial categories. And starting by honoring the plant, that meant that I would enter into those spaces at appropriate times for the reason of basically incorporating hemp into all aspects of my life. So, today I eat a lot of hemp food. I shower and bathe with hemp product, shampoo, soap, all of it. I wear hemp clothing. I have hemp incorporated into my home. And that's kind of how it has happened for me.
It's so inspiring. What a cool story too, about sitting in the hemp field and seeing those colas open up with the sun rays coming down, and just
it really was.
It was very symbolic story of you now essentially listening to the plant. And
that's exactly it.
And respecting it. So that's a really neat story. And I love that transformation that you went through, and it really carries through in how you serve your clients, which kind of gets me to the next part of the show here, getting into your business, U.S. Hemp Brokerage. Tell me a little bit more about the business today. What does it look like? You said you have 4 divisions. What is it that you offer, and how are you serving your clients?
So today, the U.S. Hemp Brokerage, we have the 4 divisions. That hasn't changed in years now. We represent a multitude of clients. So we represent, cannabinoid clients. So what that means is that if you have an idea to make a brand, let's call it a CBD brand, or even a D8 or a D9 or a THCA brand, or anything like that, any cannabinoid at all. If there's a cannabinoid in it, then we view that through the U.S. Hemp Brokerage Cannabinoid Division. So what we offer is we offer full-scale consulting where we will target an outcome with our clients. The way that we do that is we begin with the end in mind. So we think about, okay, if you are a client and you're paying us to help you, let's say, create a new hemp brand that's a CBD line, then we begin with where do you want to sell it, how do you want to sell it, and to whom? And then we start to backtrack and we start to build a tactical plan. And then we craft the tactical plan that will achieve the outcome that the client wants. So we do that. And what that really looks like is this. So we'll have a client who comes in and they say, okay, we want to do a certain kind of, let's say we want to do a THCV line of products. THCV is the cannabinoid that helps with diets and like diabetes and things like that. It's an appetite suppressant. That particular cannabinoid is a great appetite suppressant, and it's also known as like the happy cannabinoid. So like you don't get high off of it, you get well off of that, and it is an extremely powerful cannabinoid. So we discern again, where we're going to buy the supply of THCV. We procure that THCV for the client. We identify who's going to manufacture that product. If the client themselves are manufacturing, that's an easy one. If not, we identify where they can get that product manufactured. All along we're establishing capacity. See, one of the keys in business and in selling is that you don't have to sell to everybody, but you have to be able to sell everything that you can make, right? So we start around conversations around capacity and funding. Sure, you want to be in every natural grocery store in the world, but how many can you afford to go into? Meaning, could you really afford a brand, like to produce a brand where you could keep up with the volume if you go into Sprouts or natural grocers? Could you do that? And, often the answer is no. Most new brands, they can't afford to go big. And that's why we're so big on scale. You can start small and sell through everything and scale and build it and reinvest and build it and reinvest and build it. So for us, the scale concept is very real. And, so we offer those services. Then we also for the right brands, we will take the brand and we will sell that brand ourselves at retailers. When I started the company, that was the primary focus. It was, let's get these products into retail. That's not the primary focus anymore. The primary focus is the consulting and adding the value around producing the right product to achieve the outcome that we design with our clients.
That actually ties right into my next question, which is, what do you feel you do best, or where does your business really shine? So you feel like the consulting and the scalability, getting businesses to anticipate that growth and grow into it.
I do. Yeah, I think that's the greatest value add from the U.S. Hemp Brokerage. I mean, I'll just be really candid with you. We've had mixed results on bringing product to retailers. We took on clients, at one point we had 30 brands and, almost 250 different products. We aggregated those products into certain, what we called category sets. And then we brought those to retailers. And I think timing had a lot to do with our ability to get traction with some brands, not be able to get traction with other brands. And so timing really played a big role in that. We were early in the market. We were the first as a national professional brokerage service, but something called COVID hit. So what did that mean? Well, that meant that retailers weren't looking at your brands anymore. They couldn't bring in any brands because they didn't have any customers in the doors. So they weren't looking to fill more shelf space. In fact, they were looking to minimize shelf space and only keep what's really selling well. Like if you look at natural grocers as an example, at one point they had 40 brands, 40 hemp brands, right? That's huge. And Now today, I don't know where they are on that. I think they're down to something along the lines of 6 to 12 brands. But the field of cannabinoid brands, CBD brands, went from over 3,000 brands and lost 90%. So like 90% of all CBD brands that were ever introduced to market no longer exist.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there are a whole bunch of different reasons, but the primary reasons are that shopping styles changed during COVID. So everybody gravitated more toward online purchasing, even, myself included. We went from almost never ordering groceries online to everything we order for groceries comes from, we go online and order it and it gets delivered to us. That's the biggest thing, really. So what that means is that now it created opportunities for us. So don't get me wrong, right? You've got to be able to pivot. You've got to be able to see the market conditions and be willing to make the tough decisions to either kill something that you're doing or invest more in it, right? So as you can imagine, if we're representing your brand, so let's just call it, Tyler's CBD line. And our primary objective, and you've paid us a retainer, and you're going to pay us 10% on all of our sales. If I'm not able to get traction for you in retail locations because they're just not selling through very well, then what can I do? Well, I can help you establish an online presence, right? So so the US Hemp Brokerage then became able to work with a company like yours and be able to introduce and present new options that are digital e-commerce based options. So we started getting into things like blockchain, because like if you can sell online on just any typical site, that's one thing. But if you're able to amplify your ability to sell because you're now working within a blockchain platform, then that becomes ever more exciting. So the issue with the US Hemp Brokerage was this. It was that we're not going to really get good traction on retail, in-store retail. Well, then if we shift and we say, okay, we want to help you get more traction online, well, what that means is that we're now competing with our clients because our clients don't want to give up their online presence. And they don't, so I have an ability to market that brand in a way that is competitive to the efforts that my clients are making. So for instance, a practical way of looking at that is, well, if my client is already spending money on Google ads, and then I go and spend money on Google ads, what's the duplication there, right? What is my duplication? Well, I don't know. I don't know what my duplication is because their ad campaign is a discrete ad campaign that I'm not privy to. And my ad campaign would be a discrete ad campaign that they're not privy to. So while it sounds like that could work as an advantage, it's really not. What it does is it complicates the relationship in a really big way. So instead of doing something like that, we fell more on where can we truly deliver demonstrable value to the client. And it turns out that most clients don't know the pitfalls and they don't know and understand the trajectory and the history of hemp. So for us to illuminate the clients and, not just like giving hey, here's the history of hemp. No, that's not it. It's to help them really get their arms around hemp, to understand all of the components of hemp, all the different kinds of hemp. What it does for us and for our clients is it gives them many opportunities to create unique selling propositions. And then we hone in on what those USPs are. And then we help them amplify messaging around those USPs. Some of our clients really benefit greatly because we have so many different supply opportunities. So we work with a lot of different suppliers. So instead of them having to go out and hunt down a good D9 processor or converter, well, we already have relationships that are contractual with these kinds of companies. So we can immediately slot them in with supply that they need, and they don't then have to go through the brain damage of figuring it all out. So the way the brokerage works is we're able to earn a little bit of margin or markup on supply that we can deliver to our clients at prices that they couldn't possibly get otherwise.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And when you think about your customers, is there anything that they all seem to have in common? And this doesn't have to be something obvious like age or gender, but could be like attitude or a belief, something that allows them to get the best results that you notice, a common thread?
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed that the companies that can have a more refined line rather than going broad and adding, numbers of products and SKUs, to find something that you're really, really good at and focus it on that. And I'll give you an example, and this is probably the best example. Wana Wellness. So there's a cannabis company called Wana. So in the marijuana space, they have the most market share in edibles. So if you go into almost any dispensary in any state where it's legal, you're going to find Wana products, marijuana products. Well, Wana wanted to get into hemp, and we were able to work with Wana. Kind of an interesting story, but we'll save that for another interview sometime. Working with Wana, we were able to help them target a 50-state footprint with their brand, where they weren't able, as a marijuana line, they weren't able to operate in all 50 states. And the things that they did better than anybody else is they made better gummies. Maybe like the taste was just spot on, mellow taste, not like if it's a sour, it's not too sour, but it's also not lame, and where you're not getting any sour. They patented a technology on homogenizing cannabinoids within their mix, and they leaned into being vegan. So they have a vegan line of edibles, gummies in particular, and others as well, but gummies that had a unique sales proposition in that the cannabinoids were perfectly homogenized. And the last thing is that based on their patent, and really the patent was around the recipe and how it doesn't melt. Their gummies won't melt until you get up about over 150 degrees, right? So that means that, like, and we probably all have done it, if you go to a dispensary and you buy some gummies, you leave them in your car on a hot day, you come back and it's a big glob of gummy. And because it was melted, the cannabinoids pooled into one area of it, right? So you could take out this big glob of gummies, and only on the bottom, that's where you'd find the cannabinoids, and on the top, that's where all the gelatin product is, right? So to find what you do where you can do it differently and make it better than what exists in the market and limit yourself to that is definitely, really, my best advice. In the hemp industry, there's something, so we probably have all heard about this concept of shiny object syndrome. I think it actually comes from fishing. Any shiny object a fish will go after. And that's kind of how hemp is. You can do 25,000 things. Every one of those things become a shiny object. So rather than chasing the shiny objects, figure out what you do best and do that and stick with it, and understand your market, understand your customers, and listen to them, and improve your product based on how you differentiate in the market. And that's the key. It really is. It's interesting that Wana sold before we were able to really get too deep in the work with Wana. Let me put it this way. Our program was going to be introducing Wana products with guaranteed shelf space in 5,000 convenience stores. Okay. Before we could get all the way down into that, they had gotten an offer by Canopy Growth, and the offer was massive. It was over $250 million. I want to say it was $268 million or something like that. But, it was because Wana focused on doing what they do best. Then they added in some intellectual property protection. That is, in fact, what increased the value, and also just phenomenal management. Like Nancy and Eric and the people at Wana are phenomenal managers. They're authentic. They're consultative in the way that they sell. They're doing something that they're doing better than anybody else, and they're not trying to spread out too far. That's a great example. I think that was the highest value purchase of a company in the whole space in history. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's the case. I think that Nancy built that company up. Canopy bought it. I think that was the most expensive hemp purchase or
Wow.
company purchase within the cannabis space.
It
So
just goes
ultimately,
to
what's
show.
funny is they killed the hemp line. The reason they did that is because Canopy Growth already owns Charlotte's Web. So
Mhm.
they didn't want to, again, like I said, to be non-competitive against my clients. Same thing like with Canopy Growth when they bought Charlotte's Web and then later bought Wana. They didn't want to have two brands competing because why would you do that? You already own the two leading
Mhm.
brands,
Mhm.
So
Well, thank you for that. It's a really good insight and one that I think most entrepreneurs find themselves in. And I call it chasing all of the hemp opportunities.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. That is
So
truly what it is.
just a couple last questions here. Your time is very much appreciated and love all the insights here. I think our listeners are going to appreciate it as well. But if you could share maybe a bit of advice for somebody entering into the hemp world, wanting to launch a new company or a new brand or a new product line, what's one bit of advice to maybe help them prevent some of the biggest challenges that you have seen? And I know we just hit on a huge one, which is not going too broad, not trying to do too many things, get focused, get really good at one thing. But is there anything else beyond that that you find most companies hit a wall or experience a challenge with when launching a new company or brand?
Oh yeah, definitely. Know your COGS. Know your expenses. Know what it costs you to make your product at all times. You got to know it, and you don't want to overinvest. You don't want to underinvest. You got to know your COGS. So know your cost of goods sold. That would be the number one thing. Companies that don't understand their costs always end up with runaway expense. And this, I've been victim to this myself. It's not as if I've done this perfectly. It's the hardest thing to recover from, and most companies don't recover from it. So you got to know your costs, for sure. How you spend your money. I've made massive mistakes in the past on how I've overspent or how I've underspent. So it's really know your costs, know your expenses, know your numbers.
And is there a general margin that you should shoot for when obviously it's dependent upon if you're going retail, if you're going B2B or direct to consumer?
There is. That number is 30%. For most companies in most industries, you want to be able to achieve a 30% margin. It's really hard to do. If you're a grocery store company, your margins are down at 2 to 3 to 4%. This is why Albertsons and Safeway merged, and now King Soopers is wanting to merge, with the Albertsons Safeway group, right? It's because their margins are so thin. They just have super thin margins. Now, on volume, you can justify remaining in business all the way down to a 2 or 3% margin, right? But if you're a small small operation, there's no chance that you could survive on 2 or 3% margin. Normally, if you're husbanding your funds very carefully, if you really know your COGS and your overall expenses generally, then a 30% margin is what you need to achieve, because that'll typically give you a profit, call it about a 10% profit, and then you'll have that other 20% to reinvest in the company. And that's the rule of thumb, I should say.
Very good. Well, one last question here before we depart is more of a philosophical question. I like to kind of put you on the spot here and say, let's say you are standing on a podium and you were speaking to every human being on the planet and you could share one message with them. What would you want them to know? It could be about hemp. It could be about anything.
Okay. Put love first. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely what comes to my mind, man. It's, put love first. Everything falls from that, it seems, it kind of, or trickles down from that. It's like, you can endeavor in life in a relationship. You can endeavor in life, in school. your classes. Like some classes you might not like at all, and others you might really, really enjoy, and you get a lot out of it, right? But if you're choosing to garden, right, and let's say you're an at-home gardener, and you're just gardening, roses and tomatoes and peppers, and each year. When you tend to get frustrated, and when things tend to not work better, is because your outcome has been co-opted for some reason. And it could be, I'm growing these tomatoes this year because I promised my next door neighbor that I was going to deliver, a bushel. And this may seem like a weird analogy, but it's really kind of dead on as I see it. And instead of focusing on your love for growing those tomatoes, and you've just grown these amazing tomatoes, all of a sudden you're getting pressure around needing to deliver something. Like, you've got to make sure that you can deliver a bushel, as an example, right? But if you're focusing on how you're loving those plants, that is naturally going to happen. You're going to get the natural result if you're putting love first. So let's use an example of a relationship, right? So let's say that you're with somebody and there's something that you want out of the relationship that you're not getting. Well, if you think about it and take a step back, take a few deep breaths, and think about, how am I loving this person if I want this person to provide an outcome for me that's going to satisfy me, right? If you're really focusing on loving that person, what you really end up wanting is what's best for that person, what that person wants, right? So you take it out of the me and you put it into the you or them, and it becomes a lot easier. Life becomes easier. So I think that if I were on a podium speaking to everybody in the world, I would say put love first, because it works better.
Beautiful.
It just works better, Tyler. It just works better, man.
It's that glue that connects everything, that love juice that just saturates and permeates every molecule, every atom of the universe. And if we can tap into that, I totally agree. I think we'll all get what we need and what we want. And I think it goes right back to that experience you had sitting in that hemp field, having that epiphany and listening to the plant and realizing that honor, that respect, and that love. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining me on a hemp episode of Hemp Aware Radio.
Absolutely. What a pleasure, man. And, I love you dearly. Namaste and everything good to you, my friend.
Love you too, brother. And love everyone listening to the show. Thanks for tuning into another hemp episode of Hemp Aware Radio. If you've got any ideas of what you want us to cover on the next coming hemp episodes, just reach out. support@hempaware.com and we'll make it hempin'. Thanks again for everyone tuning in today.
Thank you.